Hey guys, welcome at long last back to Final Sector. F1 has taken a break. We even took an earlier break in that you may not have seen us around for a little while.
Yeah, where is that?
Apologies
That
about that.
debrief for Spa. Where is that? That's crazy. Yeah,
Yeah,
man.
it just got lost somewhere.
Yeah,
YouTube ate it.
yeah.
Spotify copyright struck us. I mean, you've heard about the rumors with F1 copyright striking people.
Yeah.
It's just the
Can't
little
escape
guys
it.
like us are always getting hurt, right?
Yeah.
Yes, apologies for being away. If you are here, we appreciate you coming back. We just have had a fair bit going on. Admittedly, quite happy to take a break ourselves.
Yeah,
As
I
much as
was-
we enjoy
I was
talking about F1,
pretty
watching
burnt
F1.
out. I've been pretty
Yeah.
vocal about that. Super burnt out on it. So having a break was quite nice, and I thought we had another week, and it's already back, and we go straight into a double header.
Yeah, how dare they? Just push it back more. Come on,
God.
what are they
Yeah,
doing?
it's so much. But no, it's good.
Yes.
At least it's a good season. Like it could have been a very mediocre, very mess season, and that would have made it much worse. The fact that the season has been so interesting is maybe it's contributed to the overwhelm as well, because there's just so much happening, but it also just it makes you still want to come back every week to watch it and to break it down. So
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. This was a bit of a summary. We are here both to mostly talk about the season so far, and in the context of course, looking ahead as well. And ultimately, we started off a season thinking this was going to be another quite dominant season. I mean, we got a lot of driver transfer news kind of early, and it made us think even more, well, let's just get through 2024 so we can see what 2025 has to deliver. But fortunately, as each race weekend has happened, there's been stories out of nowhere. And when you look at where we are now, even, we'll talk a fair bit about Spa, because Spa was almost a great summary for the year as a whole. Having all those drivers kind of crisscrossing at different advantages of different cars at different points in the race or in qualifying. It just summed up the whole season beautifully. And it makes us think, what does the rest of the season have in store? It's almost just as big a question mark than it was, I don't know, halfway through the start of the year.
Yeah.
But at least it keeps us on our toes. But yeah, as I say, we are here to kind of look at what's happened. And as you say, we've kind of been treated, not just in a vacuum treated, but treated a lot more than we were hoping we were. So I guess that's where we start. Why is it that things have changed so much compared to the first few rounds, where it looked so dominant, so doom and gloom from Red Bull?
Yeah, it is insane. I think particularly you look at McLaren and what they've been able to do in a year, basically, like a little over a year. Their meteoric rise from literally the back of the grid start of last year to hey, they're probably the favorites to win every race for the rest of the year as it stands. An insane accomplishment from that team. The turnaround has been it's like otherworldly. Mercedes as well, they've been, since these regulations started, they have always looked on the back foot, and finally they're at a point where now both of their drivers are winning races and winning them on merit. Well, the Russell's ones are interesting. I think he should have won that Spa race. That was unfair. I think he deserved that race win. That was on merit. Technically, he didn't get that race win, and then you have to look at Austria, which was his actual win, and did he get that one on merit? Probably not really with the Max Norris thing, but he has the pace to win it on merit, and probably should have had that Spa victory had he not been, was it like a kilo and a half underweight, due to the fact that he just stopped and they don't do the full lap and didn't get the pickup, and that's all it took, it seems, to have him a kilo and a half underweight, which was sad to see for him. But I digress anyway. But both, Hamilton and Russell are now winning effectively on merit as well. Ferrari, I think, they're probably a little bit behind these top three teams at the moment, but they always seem to come back strong towards the back half of the season
like
as well.
At Spa, they probably ended closer than they have
Yeah.
for a number of rounds. Of course, they won at Monaco, and it felt like they were threatening to have a big win up to that point, and then it really did drop off, particularly with Mercedes finding something finally. But the last round, look, it wasn't like a fully complete round, but they were still there or thereabouts, and you have more hope. They admitted they're going through this change. They had an upgrade that didn't work. They're now starting to, kind of take a step aside and go with a different route. And there's some, I guess, optimism there, but it adds again to that flavor. We're going to come back. Is everyone going to be switched up in a completely different order, or are we going to see kind of exactly as we left off?
Yeah.
Honestly, it could go either way. It's also a really weird track we're heading to again now, so who knows what cars are going to be good there, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's going to be super interesting. It's like, I'm thinking about like a comment I saw recently, and I think it's like in the last, I don't know, couple of days that this comment has come out, and there's high ups at Red Bull that seem to think that, hey, their car concept, they think they've maxed the potential for it.
Yeah.
Which leads back to your original question, is like, how has it been so close given how dominant they seemed at the start of the season? It's entirely possible that car concept that seemed to be never ending in terms of development that they started last year, which led them to such a dominant season, they've actually got to the point where it's like, oh, we've maximized just about everything we could from this concept. They might find, more for now, but maybe they are at their theoretical peak for their concept, with still a year to go on these regulations as well, which is, considering they're still probably arguably you could still say they're the fastest team. McLaren is still there. They're at the very least, they're in the pecking order for fastest team. But if the other teams have more development potential, Red Bull could start to lag back a bit in the second half of the season.
Out almost.
Exactly,
it's about
and for
that
next
potential,
season,
as you say. Yeah, Ferrari still saying they've got a ton of potential to maximize. McLaren and Mercedes much the same. Heck, even this concept of the Mercedes is a pretty big step different from what they've been doing already. So you can imagine they've got a fair amount to grow. And so that Red Bull, we saw in one of their most recent changes where it wasn't even it visually looked quite different, but it actually was more like a sidestep type thing, or just to be better at specific tracks rather than overall upgrade.
Yeah.
And it's interesting on the Red Bull thing. I haven't confirmed the validity of it or how much this had an effect. I did see certain users such as Scarbs Tech on Twitter, who was one of the best guys to take a very, very technical thing and try to explain it in layman's terms. He is one of the best to do it. And they were talking about how Red Bull may have had to actually remove a certain, let's call it a piece of tech that they had on their car after, or just before Miami. And it was essentially, they called it a rear cross brake inertia valve. And essentially how it worked is, as G was applied to a car as it was turning in, there was this little natural valve that would change the brake pressure, which would effectively mean that the inside tire rather, so if you're turning left, the inside left tire would brake harder than the outside right tire. And because of that, that means that you're actually getting a turning in effect because you're braking more on the side you're turning in. And apparently it was really good for tire wear because then your outside tire wasn't braking as much, so it wasn't wearing as much. So there's a suggestion that this has not just hurt their tire wear a little bit, which they seem to be really dominant with, but Max talks a lot about turn-in and turn-in issues. And it may be the concept they had really maximized this effect, and just turning it back that little bit means that this car, which we know that Max loves to drive on a knife edge, it removes the ability to drive it on as much of a knife edge, and therefore it doesn't turn in as much. So there seems to be a fair amount of substance to this. Now, whether it's the tiniest, it's a tenth of a thousandth of a second difference or not, I'm not sure. But there did seem to be some validity to it, as I say, that a fair amount of technical guys were kind of going through it and talking about it. So
something like that, again, like the way you were describing that, the second you said there was a way to adjust the brake pressure, I knew exactly where that was heading.
Yes,
that's really clever tech, and that would I want to say that'd be pretty substantial, because that would almost, it almost changes the way you drive the car as well.
Yes.
Like, you have, like Max says, having confidence going into the corner, if the rears are sliding, because they're overheating, because he can't predict the brake pressure, because it's not the same as what it was, or more predictable when it had this like actuator or whatever it had on it. So or this valve basically. So that's I didn't know that. It's super, super interesting. I'll have to read more into that, because that's I'm guessing, obviously you said they banned it because it was illegal, or...
Well, I think it was skirting around the rules a little bit. I think the rules state that both, like, front and rear tires, like, you can have brake balance to the front set versus the rear set, but you can't have brake balance left to the right.
Gotcha.
And this wasn't like an automated system doing it. It was just G-force basically applying it. So if you just broke in a straight line, they would brake at the same time. That's, again, I think there was even a directive that came out before Miami that seemed to clarify those rules, and people just thought, oh, well, they're just, sometimes they go through and clarify a rule that no one's exploiting or breaking, but just because they think someone could misinterpret this, right? Or not misinterpret, but, interpret it a cheeky way that's not intended by the effects of the rules.
Yeah.
So, again, touch wood on it, but reading through it, there seemed to be some substance there. And even just the theory of that as a concept, when people like Scarbs are going through it, they said technically it could be legal under the words, and it does coincide with a directive to actually outline it. So it seems coincidence that no one would be running it. It's not just like suddenly F1 Twitter discovered, a cool mechanic you could have been doing with the car. It's more than likely Red Bull did have something like this.
Yeah, like, where's the NOS? Like, I don't know, why isn't everyone running NOS? I feel like they should be allowed to. Where's that? Show me that in the regulations.
Bring back the movable steering wheel.
Yeah. I'll call it DAS. No one's ever thought of that.
But yeah, I mean, I did want to say we should look back. The Belgian Grand Prix, as I was saying before, was a good baseline to talk about for this season. And even from the perspective of just Max, if you look at him, it was amazing in qualifying how on fire he was, and we were almost lucky that we knew he had that penalty. Now, some people might say, well, the penalty just spurred him on, but it was a big gap. You don't get that much time just by, like, proving a point or something to go, oh, I should be starting on pole or whatever, but I've got the penalty.
It looked really dire, didn't it? Like, it's like, it looked like 2023 Max again, where it's like, it doesn't matter. It's going to be 10 laps and he'll be at the front again, so...
Yeah. But to that point, the race, I mean, we were treated where, like, there's a few storylines we can briefly touch on, because, as I say, they are a good context to describe the rest of the season. And there was a fear saying Max is just going to catch up and cut through them. And, he was starting a little further down the grid. He did chop through a few drivers, but he kind of then got stuck in this queue.
Yep.
He didn't have enough of that edge to get past everyone. Now, whether... Like Sid say, then, is that because they set his car up for quali? But then if they knew he had a penalty, why would they do that?
Yep.
It's an argument for the Ferrari, I guess, because they actually were quite quick in quali and seemed to maybe lack a little bit in the race. But ultimately, what actually happened was we had an effective Merc 1-2. Again, the disqualification aside, I think that made such a small difference that if they were compliant, I think at most the top two would have swapped, but the rest of the order would have been the same. So I think you can still call it on pure performance, on strategy, execution from the drivers that was a pure 1-2. And it was difficult for Max and to Red Bull to move through. And even McLaren, look, they did fairly well, but you could even argue they should have potentially done a lot better here, given the circumstances. But Mercedes were the ones that took it together. And maybe looking forward, is it now going to be a case? Do we have, 3 teams, maybe Ferrari on their day, all of them could win that race? They could have 7, 8 drivers maybe that could win.
Well,
is it just about the drivers?
Seven.
That's another thing I guess we saw in Spa, maybe not 8, but
yes.
You know what I mean. We could go into a weekend if everyone looks similar on pace. Is it, not necessarily up to the car, or, is it more just the driver, their application, the strategy that really matters could pay off so much. We saw it here, how pitting 1 lap later, 1 lap earlier, changing to a 1-stop had such massive consequences and changes because the margins were so tight. Hope to see more of that in the second half of the year.
Definitely.
But it meant as I say, it was a great summary for the year. I guess, yeah. Before we move on, before that, anything else, I guess, from that race you want to point out?
No, that was you pretty much covered all the emotions. I think, yeah, the fact that it was both Mercedes up the front, both on different strategies. The fact that Russell kind of called the one stop. He does this a lot, where he always tries to make a one stop when it's like, oh, it is just a two stop, or he'll try some sort of alternate strategy.
Try something else, because he recognizes if we try and it fails, we might not even lose a position from where we are. And if we keep on the current strategy, we're definitely not going to gain anything, right?
And 9 times out of 10, it doesn't work. It's absolutely the wrong decision. And that one time, he gets disqualified. So,
it's
not fair, is it? Life's not fair.
No, and it doesn't take away from, what we've talked about Russell recently, particularly after Canada, which is where he is now getting exposed to these moments where he has a chance to either win or place really high.
Yeah.
And there's just a few little critical decisions that seem to just fail him. And this race was an example of when he doesn't make any of those mistakes. Like, it's not only just making the right strategy call, but you have to make it work. Even the rest of the teams and everything, even halfway through the race. So, like, even a handful of the drivers, I think, in the top were like, should we try it? And they're just going, it ain't worth it. We ain't going to do it,
Yeah, I think Piastri, Piastri or Hamilton were like, it was one of the Ferraris, I think they wanted to do it. And then, like, a few laps later, they just like, no, we can't do it. And then
that sounds familiar. Yeah,
it was either Ferrari or it was Piastri. One of them.
It might have even been both of them. I think a lot of drivers were kind of querying about it at that critical stage, especially because of how that train was turning out and how track position really mattered. So I was saying it wasn't just Russell's decision to say to go for it, and to almost, he did kind of override the team a little bit, where he almost said, look, I kind of really want to go for it. And they said, you know what? Sure, you're kind of, at the back of this train, let's try it. But he then had to make it work. And that was all him. And Hamilton caught up, and most people would have put money to say he's going to get past, That the team were fair enough to say, nope, let him out there. They're responsible to figure this out. And he then defended like an absolute king.
Yeah.
And that was all on him. He could have choked it. He could have locked a tyre through any of that stint. He could have had an off. A few drivers did have offs, trying to, preserve the tyre, but also chase and catch.
Yeah.
Understandable for Hamilton afterwards to feel like he had been robbed a little bit, but ultimately I think it helped, of course, with how things turned out. But I think in retrospect, he would have looked at it and gone, look, it was clever of him to do that, to push for it. Maybe I should have more. But as a whole, for both those Mercedes drivers as they are for a team, for Russell, this is what, fires them to make them look so good heading into the new year. We spent so many previews saying, if Mercedes don't have, if they have another shocker, they're just done. Like, we're going to write them off for the remainder of the year. And then they end middle of the year with this performance. Yeah. And it's like, wow, okay, we told you to prove it to us that you're going to, get your crap back together. This is probably the best you could have done it. The weight thing aside, because I think that was, it wasn't like someone forgot to install something. It was just a circumstance of events that was really unlucky. And it's almost an exception, right? I wouldn't flavor it into any of this. So
yeah. Yeah, no, you said it all, mate. That's...
Yeah, and I mean, a few other drivers we can talk about. Of course, the driver that was chasing them was Oscar.
Oh, Piastri.
Lando, I think, although he was put in a kind of difficult position, he feel like he's got that Max tendency where he can be put in a tricky spot and he can let that overwhelm him, and then he can start to make mistakes, push the tire too hard, go for moves at the wrong time. Ironic considering both of them were together for most of the race, but you feel that's more of a vibe for him, where Piastri's strength, being calm, being level-headed, now that he's learnt how to bring those tires in, we're now seeing multiple examples where he stays calm, he knows when to push and when to attack, and although it didn't pay off, I think he was still the best of the rest that was out there when we think Mercedes was actually probably a step ahead for race pace. And we're seeing that more and more this year. I still think overall he's a little behind Lando, but he's not that much further behind.
It's
and given he's still
quickly.
Relatively new to F1, it's looking pretty good for him.
Yeah. It's I think I agree, because I had this right after the race when Piastri finished P3, just like he was closing on those Mercedes lap on lap, and he finished right behind them at the end of the race. My first thought was, Norris was in P3, he would have caught them and had 2 laps to try and overtake them. And I feel like it like you say, it's so close between them and it's only getting closer.
Yeah.
You still back Norris to have that edge. Like if Norris was in that position in P3 and he sniffed that win, he's gaining lap on lap. He would
find that extra charge,
exactly,
right?
yeah,
to just pull something out that 99 out of 100 drivers can't find.
Yeah, so I think that's just that little extra edge. I think is honestly the only thing he's missing now. That's all it is. He's shown how he can bring the tires in. Obviously, in was it Hungary, it was quite hot, and he did exceptionally well there. Obviously, taking the win in the end. But yeah, it's there's the flaws are becoming much fewer in his racecraft. So it's looking good for Piastri fans, which we definitely are, that's for sure.
There might be a few near us.
Yes, just a few. I was just going to talk about like the season as a whole and just sort of point out kind of why it's been so, like, you think about it and you're like, oh yeah, it's been an awesome season. And then you really think about it and you think it's just been full of moments. Like, even just race, that's the thing. Like, we've had 7 different race winners in 14 races we've had so far. I want to say 14. So like half the races have had different winners, which already is insane to think about given how dominant Max was last year. Included in those 7 race winners, we've had Hamilton winning his first race in however long at his home Grand Prix in an emotional display of, like, that was incredible. We had Sainz coming back after appendicitis to win the Australian Grand Prix. We had Norris finally getting his first win in Miami, which was a super long time coming. We've had Leclerc break his Monaco curse to finally win at home as well. We've had Piastri have his very first win, albeit with some controversial circumstances.
And under the craziest controversial circumstances.
Exactly,
It was already a good enough point as it was, but it was doubly so talked about.
And then we had, obviously, that Russell win in Austria after we've had that, that blow up with Max and Norris. Like, this season has had everything, and we're, like, just over halfway. To think that it could get even closer in the second half of the season is, like, insane to think about. Like, you look at the race winner list and it still says, like, Max is on 7 wins, and then there's a bunch of, like, one winner, but it's not that simple. It's like, it's been so close. It's like, I was going to say arguably the closest grid we've had ever. It just is. It's the closest grid we've had ever. Like, even from the back markers to the front, it just
in recent history, certainly. Maybe from
the
late 2000s, you had maybe something similar to this, but
from the back of the grid to the front, though, in terms of pace.
Oh, in terms of, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Overall, probably
correct.
It's been a bit closer. But how often have you had 4 teams in contention for, like, if you ignore
That's very rare. It's very rare.
Exactly. I mean, if you ignore the fact that Red Bull did start so strong and got out to such a dominant advantage points-wise. I know you can say ifs and buts, but you take that out of the equation and you got 4 teams that are all kind of about the same. They have their different strengths and they jump up and then they go back down and they're all sort of there. 4 teams. Normally you see like 2, maybe 3 teams if you're lucky. And definitely not in the last 10, 15 years. It's insane. It's been an insane year, and the fact that next year it could continue to be that way. Like, it's always the fear we had in 2021 where we had these regulations that have been so dominant in Mercedes' favor for so long, and finally the very last year of the regulations we've got this big title fight between Max and Lewis, and it was one of the most hyped seasons in forever because we hadn't had it for so long, and then the regulations change, and then all of a sudden Red Bull's super dominant. Everyone's ruining that. This time we're super close between 3-4 teams, and we still have a year left of the regulations to go, so people can not think about next year. Oh, it's just going to change again and someone will be super dominant and, it doesn't matter. But like it's the fact that we could have another year and a half of this is already exciting to think about. But yeah, I don't know.
For sure. And it's why getting your concepts and your upgrades right now matter, because it's not just for now to the end of the year, it's really for now until the end of the year. And we know that partway through next year you will have to decide how much resource are you going to divert to the future versus the current regs. And that was even the fear in 2021, where we said, well, Red Bull has barely gotten by in the greatest of all chances. However, if they've expended this much here, then surely Mercedes is going to be stronger next year. And as it turned out, that wasn't the case, but that was the fear running into there, right?
Yeah.
But it still is why here. It's why, for example, for Ferrari, it was so important for them when they had an upgrade go wrong, that they didn't just keep going down that wrong path, because that could sabotage their chance until 26. And instead, they took a step back. Now they're taking a sideways step, and they're happier with it. And they can then continue to drive that through for the remainder of this year, and then bleeding onto next year as well. Even more so for Mercedes. I mean, it took them so long, but now it seems they've finally got something with this current regs, and they now have time to actually maximize it both this year and leading into next year. Depending on who's driving that car, of course. We can't forget that there's still question marks around that as well, but we will get to that. And for Red Bull, if they have maximized things here, if there is a functional weakness with their car now from losing something, is this now what they're stuck with for a year and a half? Are they now stuck here? Do they need to take a risk on something else?
Like a different driver in that second seat, maybe?
That's what I was going to say. Max has been blessed in that as much as his own, dominance has taken a turn, it's not just one driver that's then peppering it away. We thought earlier in the year, we were like, is Leclerc up for this title fight? And now, you were going, is Norris up for the title fight? You still go, yeah, it's Norris, but Hamilton's looking pretty good, and now Russell's not looking, so he's being blessed that it is kind of different drivers. It more so just puts a big red flag on the constructors, because ultimately they might not even lose one place. They could lose more than one in the constructors, which is unfair.
It's so close.
When was the last time a team... When was the last time a driver won the drivers, but the constructors was third or lower? Like, I know there's sometimes, like, P1, P2 isn't uncommon for the two series, but, like, first in drivers, third in constructors. Like, I don't know. I'm sure maybe it has, but it's got to be back in the old days, not a modern day thing you ever see. And there could be a real risk of that if the other teams continue to perform well, even if one of those teams, McLaren, Mercedes, has a second half of the year renaissance in a bit and starts chipping away a lot. It's not out of the question.
Well, it's definitely not out of the question. Like, I'm looking, it's when I was making notes for this, it's one of the things I saw that, look, the Drivers' Championship, Max is, nearly 80 points ahead of Norris in P2.
He's 78, which isn't an usurpable lead, especially because now it's not Leclerc in P2, which again, you'd argue out of those drivers maybe isn't the closest to chase, but it's still enough of a buffer where he could reasonably hold that still.
I think so. I think, my money's still 100% on Max taking the title. It's a big jump. Like, Norris would have to absolutely drive out of his mind, and Max would have to continue to falter.
Correct. He wouldn't just have to have P2s. He'd have to really be making big mistakes.
Yeah. So, and I just find that hard to believe. But the constructors...
But if you look over at the other table...
My God. Red Bull's at 408 points. McLaren's only at 366. Ferrari at 345. Yes. Mercedes is a fair way back. They obviously had a slow start to the season. But McLaren in particular, that's not that far back. That is really not that far back.
No, not at all.
My God... It's so close. They really need Perez to start getting some points, some good points, some podiums.
Yeah.
Going on the Perez tangent now, I looked at the last time he was on the podium, and it was a P3 in China. He's been on the podium 4 times, and all of them have been in the first 5 races. He has not been on the podium since the 5th race of the season, and we've had 14 races. He has been shit.
Yeah.
And there's also this, I don't know if it was confirmed or if it was a rumor, but the fact that the Formula One management have basically stepped in to say, hey, don't drop Perez because it'll hurt the Mexican Grand Prix sales. And it's like, Oh, if there's any sort of truth to that, that's scummy.
Even if they raised it, Red Bull, I don't think are the type of org where they would, what do they benefit by almost saying, okay, we'll do it for you guys? It's like, I don't see them doing it. If they really wanted to get rid of him for their own motives, they would have. The fact that they are keeping him, I feel, is a strong suggestion from Red Bull, as wild and weird as it is that they're doing this. Like, he had, again, talking about Spa, he had the perfect opportunity to really shine and show something. He was starting P2. And where did he finish? At the back of that train of the top drivers, when he actually was starting ahead of them all for once.
Yeah.
Bar the Ferrari, which was basically free pickings anyway of all the drivers you were going to start behind. And he just didn't make it work. Like, his pace was okay, but again, if this is representative of the races we're going to have, it's like even on his quote-unquote good day, if this was a good weekend, then it's P8 at best if no one retires or gets disqualified. And that's not enough to hold P1 in the Constructors.
Nope, it sure isn't. Yeah, it's the fact that when we talk about how close it is, like you say, when you have 4 teams this close and you are the 8th best driver of those 4 teams consistently, that's not. And when Max is either the best or at the very least, he's probably top 3 most of the time, if not all of the time, you could argue.
Yes.
Spa, maybe less so. That's an interesting question. But yeah, like he's consistently the 8th out of 8 best driver in that those top 4 teams. Like he just is. He just consistently. Yeah, the fact that he's going to be there for the rest of the season, I think there's. I was going to fence sit or like hedge my bets. I think he's going to lose them, the Constructors. I think he just will. I think McLaren are going to go ahead of Red Bull, and it's going to be because of Checo.
And it will be. It's not like it'll be right towards the end of the season. At this trajectory, that's going to happen
in like 3
soon.
races. Yeah,
in like 3 races, we're going to be done from the double header, and they'll be basically there.
Yep, it's definitely seeming that way. So, yeah, man, if Ferrari can get back on some kind of form as well, then he could. Them keeping Checo could lose them 2 positions in the Constructors. Fucking imagine how they'll feel when that happens. I always thought that Checo not being, if there was any truth to them, dropping Checo at the mid-season point, and they didn't take it to start experimenting with, say, even Ricciardo or Tsunoda at Red Bull, or just to get Lawson in there. Like, I don't know if there was any truth to that, but they should have done it if there was. They just should have. I think Perez is going to lose them at least 1 place in the Constructors, possibly 2 if Red Bull are not as strong as they have been, if they do start to slip back into the pack a little bit.
And it's not even just for this year. Like, we're talking about this year versus next year. If you think that Max is fairly safe in the drivers and your Constructors is what's at risk, even if you keep Perez till the end of the year and then put in a new driver, isn't it better to just take the opportunity now, even if that driver doesn't perform as well this year, because we've seen even very good drivers struggle to get up to speed in here? You at least give them time to try and get through this graining period that these new drivers seem to have, to then hit the gap sorting next year. It's like, is your plan just to run Perez dry to the end of this year, lose the Constructors, and then you're throwing in someone which may take half a year or most of the year to get up to speed next year, and then you've got the same problem. It's like, then you're just looking at 26, but then you're throwing away next year. Yeah, like, I know it's not like they haven't got like the perfect scenario lined up to replace him, but it's not like he's only slightly underperforming. This is serious underperforming.
Yeah.
On his best day, again, if he's getting 8th, like you go, oh, well, Max only got 4th. It's like, yeah, but he had a penalty, and his qualifying pace, if he started on pole, you suggest he should have won, like, easily. And if Perez was in P2, he's probably still getting 8th.
Yeah.
That's it. That's
yeah.
That's the facts. I imagine straight away there's going to be microphones in people's faces once they arrive in Zandvoort going, so why? And they'll say what they'll say.
Yeah.
But immediately if he gets out on the track and he's not performing, McLaren closed that gap. Ferrari, I mean, we say Ferrari a bit behind, but it was Leclerc who still actually was ahead of Max in the race, you know.
True.
He managed to stay ahead under the pressure. There's something there tangible to say. That's not nothing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? There's so many interesting stories. You've got teams, you know, Uprising doing so well, that you just got other teams like Red Bull who you just thought, are they the next Mercedes? You know, even when we had Mercedes, even when Bottas was doing all right, you never talked about him like this ever. Like people even now are saying, I think even the race put out a video saying, as a stopgap, they should literally put Bottas in that Red Bull. That would be a better pick than Checo. And in a way, it kind of makes sense, because Bottas, although, as we'll get into, he's probably trying to stay at Audi, it could be a chance for him at a top team. We've seen that he's consistent. This car isn't a good way for him to show his skills, but if you look at his race by race, he's apparently still performing quite well and doing what he can around a team that's struggling more so just to manage themselves.
Yeah.
There's even an argument to say just put him in there, and even if he does what he did at Mercedes, that's enough. And it's way better than what we're seeing, you know? So...
Exactly. Like, you can't really do much worse than Checo is right now. It's I reckon the 75-80% of the drivers on the grid or in the wings could do exactly what Checo does or better, possibly higher. It's the decision to hold on to him for so long. I don't get it anymore. Like, I got it for a while. Like, I understood where they were coming from. I didn't agree with it, but I could understand it. I don't understand it anymore. I really don't. And if also the fact that he's still technically got a contract for next year, like he's signed on for Red Bull for 2025. If he is seriously in that car for 2025, I might blow a blood vessel. Like,
we would have had to see a serious... Yeah. We're either going to be amazed. We're either going to blow a blood vessel because either he salvages this and then finishes top 3 in the drivers, in which case we'll go, what the fuck? Or we'll see him in the car, in which case we'll go, what the fuck?
Yeah, it's true.
And it feels like one of those two is more likely than them removing him from the car for performance. It feels like one of those two is actually more likely to occur.
Yeah, it does seem that way.
Like, there's no faith they'll even remove him. I think, although we don't know the true reasons behind it, again, one of the break podcasts that the race put out was talking about underrated drivers. And it wasn't just going, let's talk about the lower half of the grid, but it was actually trying to apply both why people see that some drivers are quote-unquote underrated, but also some drivers that were rated, why they're not rated now. And they made a great comparison between Checo and Hülkenberg, two drivers that performance-wise have kind of changed their positions amongst each other recently, if you were to rate, the drivers top to bottom on their performance.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be that, like, for the prior, 2 generations ago of cars, where... like, Checo was a god at taking care of the tires and just pushing so hard at everyone when everyone else's tires were dead. Like, when he started in F1 and he did gladiator performances in the Sauber, for example. And even in the Force India, the reason he was so consistent was he was just amazing at those tires. Other people drowned off and he could stay up there. And Hulk had some degree of it, but he couldn't nail it as much as Checo could with those regulations. And now in these regulations, Hulk actually gets it much better. Like, he's really good at being a tire whisperer and pushing when he needs to early and still having tire left. Well, excuse me, Checo, who used to be the tire whisperer, you don't even, mention it anymore. We just had a race where you could have eked out the one stop. Checo was always the driver who could have maximized that. That was his real strength. Even if his out-and-out raw pace wasn't the best, his quali pace, he can still make an alternate strategy work. And it even seems on a 2-stop, he just burnt his tires and didn't make it work. It's like even on the strategy everyone else is doing, he doesn't have that strong suit. And it does seem to be with how this gen of cars have changed, how you need to treat them. You can't just, treat a car gentle. Every race car, every different era of the rules of F1, you have to, do different things to treat a car a certain way.
It's interesting, actually, because, you're talking about people who... did really well in previous generations that struggle in this generation. Ricciardo fits that bill as well.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
He's exactly the same. Maybe he's a similar kind of driver to Checo. Maybe not in the exact same way, but the way he needs the car to handle, because Ricciardo's obviously, since these regulations have started, has been very up and down. Like, he has his moments, but for the most part, he's considerably far off what he would normally be. You know,
when you consider he was at, if not beyond, Verstappen's pace.
Exactly, yeah.
In comparison, yes.
Yeah, and when he was at the Renault against... It was Hulkenberg, wasn't it? And he...
Yes.
And he, like... I would say he outperformed that car where it was at that stage as well. And then he went to McLaren. And where did he go? Did he go to McLaren 21 or 22?
I can't remember. Around
if it was 22, if it was 2021, then maybe this is where my argument falls apart. But if it was 2022, it fits my argument perfectly, because that's when he started to struggle.
Yeah.
Don't fact check me. It's fine. Yeah, but he started to struggle from then on, and then he was particularly up against someone like Norris, who obviously has gotten a handle on these regulations quite a bit better than a lot of other drivers. And, you know, then you talk about adaptability. You know, it's so important to be adaptable. Someone like an Alonso or Hamilton, who have gone through 3 different sets of regulations now and have effectively been competitive in all 3 sets of regulations.
Yes.
You know, Norris was, I think he was, in the previous set of regulations, he was probably outperforming his machinery as well, and now he's showing what he can do in this as well. So it shows the importance of how you have to be adaptable when the cars change that much, and you need to be able to learn quickly, or as quickly as you can, how to drive the cars as quickly as possible. And drivers like Checo and Daniel just don't seem to be able to do that, at least not with these regulations. So that's just the way it is.
And it's the extra flavor where even if you have the same regs when you're switching teams, it can be very car dependent. And some drivers, again, it seems to be like Leclerc, can kind of jump into any car and kind of pick it up decently well enough and drive it well enough. And I guess that's for Ricciardo, like, he really liked that pointy Red Bull, and the Renault had a little bit of that characteristic, but then other cars he drove, like the McLaren, didn't have it. Now, whether that's translated into his current, like, pace being a bit mid, or whether that's just because he's had some time off or whatever, it's hard to say. You can only really look at that consistent stint that he had. Whereas Checo was almost the opposite, where as much as the regs suit, this type of car also doesn't suit. So he's almost got a double whammy of 2 things that don't, like, suit him for his specialty. And again, to the point, if you're a strong driver, you will kind of learn to adapt to drive anything. You feel like the greats can just learn to you know, pick up something and drive it, even if it's fundamentally so different. It was even the case if you look back to Senna, and even when he had the change to a Williams, which itself was very different from the car he was driving, the McLaren, and then they had to take out all the automation, so it was an absolute dog of a car. But towards the end of his, you know, unfortunate end of his career, he actually was starting to pick it up and pull things out of that car, which was still seen as a pretty dog of a car, and vastly different to what he'd driven previously. Because he just could kind of unwind, you know, habits. It's always about habits. That was the biggest thing with Daniel at McLaren, was it seemed like his like mid-corner, he just had habits he couldn't unlearn for what he instinctively wanted to do that the car didn't like. And drivers like Leclerc are really good at instantly, like, blocking off bad habits and changing to something completely different, and then just learning that and doing that subconsciously. It'll be interesting to see drivers like Max, if they're forced to drive something very different, can also do that, or whether this is just like a one-trick pony really solid in this car. Similar thing for Vettel, who seemed to really like the Red Bull, and though he was decent in the Ferrari, it felt like he could have maximized it more, you know, and even then moving to the Aston, he really struggled to get up to speed with it. So it's just a way, it's sort of kind of analyzing drivers and how they can change and how they differ from each other. And I think that's a comment for Bottas, where he can kind of drive everything consistently well enough. So even if the suggestion is put him in the Red Bull, it's because he can probably just pick it up and do a decent job. He's not going to be superb, but you're rolling less of a dice. He's more consistent to be about 90-95% there. So it's fair comment. It's an interesting thought experiment. And ultimately, as we say, it's maybe influencing a bit of the drivers market. It's going to be interesting for people like Ocon, like an Ocon to a Haas. Could he actually this could just fit him brilliantly and he does amazing, or is it just going to be a complete turnip because he can't drive a car like that?
Yeah, it will be interesting to see because he's been in Force India. Was he anywhere before Force India?
He was
Racing Point?
he did his stint in Marussia first.
Marussia, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that. I don't think you can judge anyone's performance on a Marussia.
His performance is actually very strong in that car.
Yeah.
That's part of what got him the drive, to be
Yeah.
fair. So
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what. It's why everyone held Bianchi in such high regard as well as this stuff he was able to do in that Marussia.
yeah.
So, yeah, but anyways, obviously, Force India Racing Point, up against Checo, and Checo obviously moved on to the big team.
And
because
they were
of it,
fairly equal, but I think Checo being the longest standing driver had more credibility there. They were kind of 50-50 by the time that Stroll came in, you'd argue. So
yeah, I mean, you have to remember Ocon is or was. I don't know if he's still he seems to think he is, but the part of the Mercedes
he
junior
still
program,
has
some ties,
connections there. Yes, there's some connections there.
Mercedes they tend to back pretty. They know a strong driver when they see one. That's why all this talk on Antonelli, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. But they back. It's not like the Red Bull program where it seems like they have 17 drivers every year.
Yes.
They have
net wide, so then you've got multiple to pick from.
They have a couple of drivers, and they're all just guns, it seems. Especially if they're holding on to them long term, or if they're backing them from a young age, they're probably pretty damn strong. Russell is, a hell of a story for that as well. You look at what he's doing at the moment, after over outperforming that Williams for fucking 3 seasons while they wanted to hang on to Bottas.
Biding his patience, building his skill.
Yep. And then goes into the Mercedes against a Lewis Hamilton who had won 7 world championships. It's like he's gonna sink in that team. And maybe he hasn't always been at the level of Hamilton, but man, he's done pretty well given the circumstances.
That's the best way to put it.
So Mercedes know how to back drivers, and the fact that Mercedes backed Ocon, and if you've watched enough F1, regardless of your feelings on him as a person or him as a driver, he is quick on his day. He just is. So I will be curious to see if this Haas move will work out. I just don't think it will. I just think his attitude towards racing, especially with his teammates, we got someone like an Ollie Behrman coming in.
Complete wild card. Let's be real.
It is a bit of a wild card, and my thought is like the way you get the best out of someone like Ollie Behrman is you have an experienced teammate alongside him, one that will help sort of nurture him and bring him into the sport and help him out. Ocon's not going to do that. He's going to barge him out of the way as he goes past, and he's going to be more aggressive towards him than he is on anyone else on the track. It's such a weird signing for me. They obviously knew they were going Behrman for a while, and Ocon's come after the fact. I just don't understand. Like that driver pairing to me seems...
They really wanted Behrman Hulk for sure. That would
Hulk
have been
for
a
sure,
really good matchup for them.
That would have been that's when I'm talking about experience, someone who can help them, bring them into the sport and build their confidence and help them out and all this like mentor-y sort of thing.
Yes.
Hulkenberg is exactly the kind of person who I think would be incredible at that, especially with his performances at the moment, like how confident he is in himself. That'd be perfect. And Ocon just seems like the exact 180 direction to someone like that, but
it'll also be difficult how you use it as a baseline. Like we go back to when we had Mick and Mazepin, or we thought Mick was doing well compared to Mazepin, but then he immediately got his shorts thrown up by Magnussen, who immediately got his shorts thrown up by Hulkenberg, and it's like,
where's the baseline for Haas?
Like,
we still don't know.
Even if they get like a few points, you go, but could they have had even better if they had any other drivers? And again, it could be a case of, look, they know they're losing Hulk and they just don't see enough in Magnussen, which I think is fair enough. And maybe this is a case of saying, we ain't doing this for 25, we're doing it for 26. And maybe if Ocon is rubbish, then they turf him and get someone else in there for 26, right, that misses out. Maybe, they try poach Sainz or something, right? or a Bottas who's free. You know, he's pretty good. He's known as a pretty good mentor in these parts.
True.
Yeah, even like a Gasly is known as a better mentor. Like he
Yeah.
basically mentored Yuki. You know,
Yeah,
they're
that
known
was-
as the deadly duo.
Yep. Yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, just talking that point before about drivers and seeing how they're adaptable. Like Sainz is one of those who's driven a lot of
Yeah,
different cars
true.
and just seems to get it. And I think that's why his Williams move, you don't really see it as like he won't perform. It's more a question mark on the team in the car in that case, right? But he is another case of a driver who, even if he doesn't have those highest of highest peaks, he's a safe pair of hands. Like,
Oh yeah.
even the fact that we're talking about him, that he's going to Williams and we still don't know like a Merc seat and we still have a quote-unquote open Red Bull seat. Like,
Yep.
if you don't know anything about F1, it still seems criminal, but it's just the politics of F1 and the most interesting parts of F1, you know, of why
Yeah.
this is the case and why we're sitting here going, a Williams move makes sense. And a lot of people go, what are you talking about? What do you mean? He's doing great at Ferrari and he's going to Williams when there's free
Yeah.
seats and you just go, no. Sit
Yeah,
yourself down.
but yeah,
This
what
is-
you need to understand is that Lewis Hamilton, you know, he wanted to go to Ferrari, and you can't really turn down a Lewis Hamilton if he wants to have the seat.
Yes.
But then why don't you get rid of Leclerc? Ferrari's not going to get rid of Leclerc. They've been basically building Leclerc.
Golden
He's
child.
the golden child for Ferrari. Blah, blah. It's real nuffy stuff that you can't
What about
explain.
Red Bull, he knows them. He even, moved aside.
No, they're saying they're not going to. No, they're saying you can't
butt
do
head
that.
with Max or something. And,
Yeah. It's, you've obviously got all the drivers in the wings, and Ricardo obviously, Max gets along with Ricardo. Well, what are we going to do with Liam Lawson? Who's Liam Lawson? He's not even in the sport. I don't know who that is. It's like the thing from Always Sunny, where it's Charlie pointing at the board and all these lines, and you just going a bit insane trying to get to the bottom of this conspiracy that is the Formula One off-season stuff, or the off-track stuff. So,
what do you mean? What do you mean F2 is a sport? Who's winning that? I don't care.
What?
No one that we care about is winning F2.
no,
No reason to look there for a driver.
oh, don't need it. Don't need it. We just had
Super Formula? No, I never heard of it.
Yeah, we had Porsche come out and basically criticize the fact that he wasn't considered, which I think is fair. We've had Hadjar, who is now leading the Formula 2 standings. He's come out and basically said, you should be... I think even criticizing his own, the Red Bull structure at the moment. Is like, RB, the whole point of that, or the V-carb, the whole point of that is you promote junior drivers. That's the point.
It's
I want to
literally
be
a second team. Who else has a junior team?
Exactly. So
And
it's
they're going, that Ricardo fella, hey, he's doing all right.
fuck yeah. It's weird. It's a weird space at the moment. But yeah. I mean, I want to go back to that Williams lineup with Sainz going to Williams, because we talk about strong lineups on the grid. Albon in his current form, Sainz in his current form at Williams, taking out the Williams performance at the moment, I still expect them to be working towards something good, particularly with someone like James Vowles at the helm. I really rate him as like a team boss. But that driver partnership, that's got to be one of the strongest on the grid for next year, right?
And they've been talking... How long have they been talking? They've had all this investment, new facilities, and it feels like now they're on the cusp of saying we're about to maximize it.
Yeah.
Even if they had their older driver lineup or a prior driver lineup with one decent driver and one pair of hands,
Rookie-ish.
right?
One pair.
You still would have gone, well, we should still see something out of it. This is best case scenario for drivers to then maximize their... Not just whatever they're trying for next year, but the year after. It's if they don't do it here... You'd almost just say, look, there's something fundamentally wrong with how Williams is. You almost need to scrap it and start from scratch.
Yeah.
Because this is your best opportunity. You've just got all the resources in place, all the funding, all your infrastructure. And now you've got two absolute primo drivers.
Yeah.
If you don't actually maximize it, then you've got to start going, look, as much as even if you do well, fundamentally as a team, we're never going to see them at the top again. It's a team that used to be at the top. They actually still quite high in a lot of records in terms of wins, in terms of championships, because they did so well. And it's well, we've seen you can do it. We've seen obviously Aston make a jump. We've seen McLaren go from the top to the mid. to the back to 70 grid places, electrocuted in testing, to the front again. There's no reason Williams can't do it, and this should be the kickstart of that. You ain't gonna get a better jumping pad than this.
Yeah, it's interesting as well, considering where Williams are in the championship and their current performance. Albon has decided to stay and sign on for a multi-year contract.
Yeah.
They've managed to persuade Sainz to go onto a multi-year contract.
Yep.
You don't get two drivers of that quality and in that high demand unless there's something about that team. You just don't get that. So this is why I'm like, I think I said it last year about this year, but maybe I was a bit premature. This Williams, I think you have to keep a very close eye on them, because I think they'll be there at some point. They're working towards something, and maybe it'll pay off, maybe it won't, but they're the team that are the most intriguing to me, because it feels like they're building to something big. And I'm here for it. I really am.
Yeah. Again, as much as this year, fortunately, is very exciting. There's just so much that's interesting. I mean, we still talk about other seats. I mean, the kind of biggest one is Audi. It seems that Bottas is going to stay there. He's kind of been teasing it a tiny bit, but then he could also just be teasing things because that's just the kind of guy that he is, right? He has fun with these type of things.
I think I did see, was it for the Audi seat, was it Bortoletto was possibly rumoured that they might have been looking?
They were, I knew someone was looking at Bortoletto, and I think it might have been Audi were actually taking an interest in him.
So he's second in the F2 championship at the moment. He's actually had a really good run of form recently. So and he's come from F3 straight to F2. So I think that's right. He's a rookie in F2 and he's coming second. He's been really strong. I know we're not getting much into F2, but that Invicta team, both their drivers, is finding some serious pace. Yeah.
And it's, as you say,
he won the F3 title. Of course he did. Yeah.
And to the point, he's against an Alpine Academy driver who's strong, but I think he has had the performance over Kushmani. And it's like Invicta Racing isn't necessarily like a team that nurtures like talent, you know what I mean? Like traditional wise, you more think of your Prema or other teams, but he's kind of on a trajectory here, and he could be the biggest one to challenge, as we're saying, if who arguably should get a Red Bull or a V-Carb drive for next year, and that's the driver he's challenging. So.
Yeah, that's true. I think the only thing going against Bortoletto is the fact he is part of the McLaren driver program. So, but if he decides he wants to stay a part of that program, he would have to get, I guess, permission. Maybe they will allow it. But...
when is a spot going to open up for McLaren?
Exactly, that's what I mean. They
don't exactly have a junior team.
Exactly. So, they'd have to, depending on how much, if Bortoletto continues this sort of form, maybe McLaren want him as a junior and development driver, and they don't want to lend him to someone like a Sauber/Audi for him to potentially run away with, that team. And suddenly they've come good, and Bortoletto's, he stormed into his first year and done really well, and now he's just going to stay there, and McLaren have lost him potentially. I think, it's. Again, politics, Formula One politics. It's
I know.
Way above our pay grade.
He's done enough to earn himself some sights. I think it is.
Sure.
Like, there's a few F2 drivers that have done that. I mean, the other driver you had leading in mind was, of course, Paul Aron. I still think is consistent, but it's almost like that lack of firepower, which is what the likes of Hadjar, what the likes of now Bortoletto are showing, is actually what then gets them in the limelight.
Well,
right?
I don't even think. I think Aron, like you say, he is consistent. He's cool. He's like very level-headed. Kind of like a Piastri kind. I think.
Yes.
He started the season exceptionally strong and showed what he was capable of. The last few races, it's not been his best. He's
just made a few critical errors that have exposed him a bit for some weaknesses.
Yeah, exactly. He's still I think is he still P3? I think he's only just behind Bortoletto.
That's
maybe.
Right. Yeah, he's just behind Bortoletto.
Yeah, so he's still definitely there. Like, there's still 4 races to go, and there's a lot of points up for grabs in Formula 2, so anything can happen. But you're right. I think the last few races have not been a good showing for him. So I'm kind of hoping that he can recover that and make it a really close title fight. But like you say, Hadjar's he's been the pick of the bunch in terms of pace. He's just the fastest driver on that grid at the moment. Anytime he doesn't get a little bit unlucky or into some sort of collision, he is just the fastest. Like, you think about, I always go back to Saudi, the second race of the season for them, and the fact that he had 2 DNFs due to the fact his car just basically broke down on him, and he was running really, really strongly. And he's still, 20 points ahead, I think, of Bortoleto in second, something like that, 15, 20 points. When he should be...
He's more than that now.
Oh, even more, 30.
36, I think.
Bloody hell, it's even more than I thought.
Yeah.
But, and the fact that he probably should have gotten, let's say, another 20 points. That's probably more from Saudi, through no fault of his own. He's probably lost 20 plus points. He could be a long way ahead in this championship. He is just the fastest driver on the grid.
And it's a shame because he also has good attributes of a Red Bull driver, and I mean that in where I wouldn't call him selfish, but he like, some drivers try to be like aggressive or assertive, or they be a bit of a dick, but then they end up just throwing it away. We've seen instances where he's maybe been a little mean or a little rude, but then he backs it up by being this far ahead, you know? So he's got that, like, he backs himself, you know?
Yeah.
But he's like, no, give me the chance to do this and it'll pay off.
Yeah.
Which is similar to what a young Vettel had, similar to obviously what Max still has and has had. Even a young Ricardo to a sense, in a different in a different way. So it's almost a shame that he's jammed in this Red Bull bottleneck. I think he would be a fantastic. He's almost got like a mix of like Yuki, but like with, you know, a different kind of, I don't know, a different version of Yuki in a way. Where it's almost like he's got that aggression, that I don't even know what words to use. That fire, that bitiness, you know, like he still reacts quite viciously to things going wrong, but that's because he's got so much drive to dominate.
A lot of
passion,
passion, you know?
Yes, the passion, that's right. It comes from that passion and missing it. And if you're just finishing down the bottom, if you've got that, you just look like a fool. It's like, you're coming 12th, why are you getting this angry over it? But there's not a spot for him. I guess the other spot relating to a similar driver, the other Alpine seat, seems to still be Jack Doohan, right?
It's got to be Doohan. It just has to be.
The only case would be if there were juniors doing well. I think Victor Martins, if he was having a good year, would have had a strong contender for this seat.
Yeah.
It's frustrating.
Yeah.
Every race, I feel like, Martins, he's starting P2. Oh, what's he done now? He's gone.
It didn't help that, like, ART in general have been pretty shit this year. But
they're
even
not helping to give him good starts, a good car. But even when they do, he then does something to just be an idiot, drive off the track, or
not been a good year.
So, as much as he's had that chance, I think even who is it? Gabriel Bollo's teammate is also the other Alpine driver, right? Kush
Maini,
who is doing fine, but Jack Doohan, even if his junior career was like decent but not stellar, the team have been like stellar happy with what he's doing in the background. So again, there's no reason any other junior, like Alpine and Nice, they've got a few choices, but you feel like Jack Doohan is almost a shoo-in.
It does seem like a shoo-in.
Strong reason not to go with him.
Yeah.
And the fact that this announcement has already come up to say the seat's free this early, they wouldn't have, I guess, even done this early to it's not like the day after this happened was when Ocon was announced. It felt like Ocon was kind of in the dry and then had to sort something out for himself. So they don't make an announcement like this unless they've got a pretty good idea for him.
Yeah.
So I feel like the grid is kind of sorted. There's still a question mark on Mercedes. I think for Mercedes, the question is, if they don't go with Antonelli, who do they go with? That's more still the massive unknown.
I was gonna say the same thing. It's like, well, now that they've, Sainz was a lot of stupid people will talk about, well, what if Max could go there? He's not going to Mercedes. Sainz was really the only potential, because he was obviously holding out for something. The fact that he's already going to Williams, it's Antonelli or who?
Bust.
Like, who else? Who else do you see in that seat? There's no one.
Yeah, they would then need a stopgap, and there are no drivers that want to be a stopgap. Sainz, of course, doesn't want to be.
Nope.
And then who else?
Bottas?
Like, you're trying to entertain
You put
Bottas
Bottas
to
back
be
in
a
there?
stopgap.
Nah.
But if Bottas wasn't gonna get that Audi seat, which it seems like he is,
Yeah.
maybe that's your backup, because
That's-
maybe Bottas, the alternative is he's off the grid and he goes,
Yeah, I
stuff
don't
it,
know,
I'll
man.
do one last stint at Mercedes for a year or two.
Yeah.
But that's not even an option, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think I think at this point, with all other real options off the table, with Mercedes in the I guess the form that they are, I think they kind of just have to take a gamble and say, you know what, we throw the young kid in there.
Yeah.
He's got in his rookie season a feature race win. He started the season off in F2 a bit, not off on the best foot. Prema in particular were not also much like
Hard
ART.
to know
They
if
were
it's team driver.
yeah. But he's got a feature race win in Hungary, I want to say he won at.
That's right.
But and you compare him to Behrman, who has a spot on the grid. He's outperforming him pretty substantially. Like every race, it seems like he's driving better than Behrman. So if that's all you have to go by teammate comparisons, he's doing pretty well considering someone. He stepped up from Frecker straight to F2. You got to remember that. He didn't go through the normal, Frecker to F3 to F2. He just completely skipped F3.
2 years in F3 that they sometimes
exactly.
Didn't have any of it.
Yeah, just wins Frecker first year. I think it was first year. I could be wrong about that.
Right.
And then goes straight to F2, gets to a point where he's winning feature races and actually looks pretty dang comfortable in that series now. I think at this point they have to take a gamble and say, look, George can run the team. We think he's experienced enough. He's been in Formula One 6 years now, is it?
Sounds about right.
3 years at Williams, 3 years at Mercedes. Yeah, that's probably about right.
Yeah.
Put Antonelli in there and see what happens. I think that's the option they have.
I think it's the option they have and the only option they have.
That's it. Well. That's what I mean. That is the option.
Yeah.
So that'll be good to see, though. That'll be if he does end up getting that seat. That'll be another really interesting watch to see how he adapts. When you think about 2 years prior, he was in bloody F4. Like it's like Max Verstappen level stuff, and we saw his first year in Formula One and how that went. So,
and Max at least got some time in Toro Rosso.
Exactly. Yes.
We ain't getting him in Williams. That was a possibility, which is now ruled out. So
maybe that's the problem that Mercedes have, is they don't want to put him directly into what they think might be a race winning or championship winning team, because I think it's just
of
too
course.
much.
Yeah.
It's just a hell of a lot of pressure to heap on an 18-year-old kid. So
yep. So the amazing thing about F1 is that as much as we started off talking about how excited we are for the rest of this year, we've then spent the other half of this podcast
talking about next year,
complete future things, and it's just as exciting. So it's like even if we come back and suddenly Max is dominant again, or some other story that means that it's boring, it's just there's so much information to consume. It's partly why we were both kind of just washed over for a bit and just need to step back, because there's so much to keep up with just day to day, but there's so much in the future to think about and talk about, and so many implications.
Yeah,
it's just
not even talking about the bloody, or we're not going to get into it. I think we've already run an hour, 10 minutes. But we're not even going to talk about the fact that Binotto's replaced Seidel at Audi, and now he's running the Audi project.
Massive decision.
Audi have just poached Jonathan Wheatley from Red Bull, who's been their sporting director for the 700 years and has basically been instrumental in Red Bull's rise. Still don't know where Adrian Newey's going. The most recent rumors look like he's heading to Aston, but I saw one an hour before I recorded that Alpine have thrown their hat in the ring into that as well. So fucking who knows what's happening there. Like, bloody Alpine ditching the Renault engine as well. Like, Renault completely
they're
disappearing.
trying to put Mercedes in there now.
Yeah.
Their engine department just shut down.
Like, it's never ending. There's so much you could talk about. Like, we could literally talk for hours and hours and hours and not cover everything.
Even Porsche saying they're fully closing their doors is substantial, considering they're supposed to be as big a presence in F1 as Audi is, and now they're
they were so close
opposites.
to being with Red Bull. Like, that was the whole thing, was them being
the engine supplier for Red Bull. Even Red Bull are moving to Ford engines soon, aren't they?
Yeah,
That's a
they
thing.
sure are. Yeah, and then
Isn't
Aston
it
are getting the
Honda's
Honda
moving to
engines.
Aston?
Yeah.
What is that? I completely forgot about that.
Yeah, that's happening.
This is
Yep.
incredible sport.
Fucking hell, man. Yeah, can't. There's,
I need another break.
yeah. Yep. Come back in a month. We'll debrief
Yeah.
the fucking.
There actually is between Singapore and Texas. There actually is a 1 month break. So
Oh, is there
we'll actually
really?
have a little bit, yeah, with how it works out, we'll actually have a little bit of a end season break as well.
Very
so
nice. That's what I
it's
like
quite
to hear.
convenient. Exactly.
Yeah.
A break from watching our favorite sport. It sounds,
Yeah,
like such a twisted
Real
concept.
first world problems we've got here. Yeah.
It's just.
It's just there's so much content and so much to absorb.
I mean, it is. You know, people often go, "What sports do you watch?" I'm like, "Oh, F1." Yeah, what else? I'm like,
That's
"What do
enough.
you mean, what else? I
That's
don't need
enough for
anything
me.
else."
Yeah.
That's it,
That
bro.
consumes my life, bro.
It's true. It's true. It's
Yeah.
all you need.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. There's all sorts going on. I think Aston are a big question mark for this year, up or down or stagnant, even for the future. We'll have to see. Engine penalties are already a thing. We suspected last year, as with everywhere, it would be a thing, and it wasn't. But we've already seen some cars fall foul, and we're only a little after halfway. Particularly for Red Bull, for the V-Carb, for other teams, who knows, that probably will actually start to matter more towards those last races as well, so we'll have to consider that. Plenty more as well, but yeah, I think for a bit of a mid-season look at the past, look at the future, I think we've covered it quite well.
A lot,
I well and truly feel now like I've de-rusted a little bit as well. This has been good just to get
like
a reminder of everything that's going on.
Weight lifted off my shoulders now. So, it was good.
Yeah, we then got to start chatting, of course, in the not too distant future about the next weekend that's coming up. Allegedly, there's still a lot of tickets available. I don't know if I saw a thread because the organizers were worried with the fact there's so many tickets available.
What do you mean Max isn't dominating? I'm not going anymore.
We'll have to see, but be just as interesting a weekend to look forward to as the last few that we've had. So yeah, before we close out, anything else you wanted to mention?
No. For fear and going off on another tangent for another 10 minutes, we'll leave it at that. I'll just say
free going. No.
No. I'll just say if we've missed anything and there's things you want to mention, anyone that's listening or watching, let us know. If you're listening on YouTube, leave them in the comments. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening, I don't think I have comments enabled on the Spotify one, but yeah, even leave them on our Twitter at Final Sector YT. Just let us know what you thought of it and any thoughts, feelings you have for this season and beyond. Love to hear it. Like, I know we haven't covered everything. I know for a fact we haven't covered everything. So we'd love to hear from you.
One or two thoughts or questions to cover as well. I think we might check and we can even dab those into our preview as well before we any. So we'll have a little look for that as well, just in case anyone drops something.
Yeah, apologies if we haven't covered it. It's, like I said, it was a lot. There was just a lot to do. So
the fact we're here now, I think, is a pretty big achievement.
Yeah,
so.
Honestly, yeah.
Not that we want to pat ourselves on the back.
I'm gonna do it.
Oh, excellent. Yes,
Fantastic.
thank you for listening. If you've made it this far, you're always appreciated being here as a listener, so we hope that you enjoyed some of the discussion. As we say, we're hoping to be back at it thick and fast and on time with our discussion, our upload schedule moving forward for the remainder of what will hopefully be a fantastic year. So as we say, we'll look forward. We'll see you as we preview the home of Max. And until then, hope you've enjoyed the break. Hope you're ready for some F1, and we'll see you in the future, guys. Thanks for listening.